Hi there, and welcome aboard another edition of Wild Goose Adventures. We're all about new places, new perspectives and new technology. Part of that new technology is actually taking advantage of something that's very old, and that's the wind. And we need the wind to get going in this sport. So I thought I'd go through some of the basic rules to make these things go fast with the use of the wind. Let's sheet on. The first part of this technology is knowing the wind and knowing what parts we can sail, what parts we can't sail, and what parts make us go fast. The first thing I wanted to talk about is where the wind comes from. The sail will always point into the wind. The wind's coming from over here, and as you can see, the sail is just naturally flying into the wind. And that was the first one that makes it really easy. So knowing the wind's coming from there, I'm going to put the sail down and let's look at a couple of things. The first thing I've drawn up is a little triangle. And little triangle is really to aid us in the first part of where the wind's coming from and where we can and cannot sail. This represents what I call the no-go zone. So if I lay it in the same angle as our sails pointing like that, this here represents the point of sail where we can't go. We can't go into the wind. The sails just flap and we get no speed. And we can't really sail about 45 degrees either side of the wind. And everything behind me, from this mark onwards, we can go and we can utilise to make the most amount of fun possible. With the wind coming from here, everything going up is towards the wind, is up and into the wind, and everything going down is down and away from the wind. The other point on this is we can go either side. We can go one side or the other. And if we can't use sailing here, but we can change from one side to the other, and if we go into the wind, we call it a tack. Now the other part is the jibe. So jibing is when I want to go from this spot here to this spot here. And you might have noticed that I've gone with the wind and that. Remember, a tack is going from one side and I'm facing here, facing the wind, and I'm coming this way. Well, a jibe is the opposite. The jibe, I'm turning away from the wind, changing hands and coming up. And so the jibe tends to be fairly fast and is the first transition that you should be looking at. And our right hand's forward, it means we're on starboard tack. So it's coming over our port side, we are on port tack, and we'll come back to that later. And one part about this is that whether it's port tack or starboard tack, if we're going as close to the wind as we possibly can, it's quite slow. And not to mention that is that everything is trying to push us backwards. So it's not our ideal point of sail straight up. And even though to go up into the wind is a little slower, it also helps us to get rid of the creep to go backwards, and then you end up with the walk of shame. So when you don't have enough breeze to go, I suggest we sheet on hard and we go up into the wind like that as close as we can. And we wait for a puff, and when the puff comes, and we see a puff coming, then we bear away, and you can feel the pressure already is just coming into the sail. And at that point we're heading away from the wind, and a couple of pumps and you will normally get up. And you'll see the breeze, the wind starts to ruffle, and then not after ruffling, when there's more wind, there tends to become some little white crests on top of the waves that have been blown by the wind. And that's what you're really looking for, is the wind and how much there is. And that is your judge to go from here close haul to decide that you want to try and power on. So just pull on and away we go. So that's close haul and a no-go zone, and going into a reach and a broad reach. And they're our prime points of sail. You might be asking, what happens if we go straight away from the wind? The trouble with going straight away from the wind is that when we do this, we're going with the wind, and so we feel like we have a reduction in the wind. And so that is actually quite a slow point of sail, and not one that we really want to go to. We want to be going on about a reach or a broad reach. And as we come up and we get into a bit of breeze, that brings me to my next point. Up till now, we've been talking about true wind and where the breeze is coming from and that angle. And we tend to use it, we're going at the pace, we're governed by the pace of the wind that we have. As we start to rise up on the foil and we go faster, what happens is by going faster, we start to get what we call apparent wind. And apparent wind looks something like this. Okay, so this is a little test on apparent wind. As you can see, I'm holding a bit of spinning cloth and there's a little bit of breeze, maybe a couple of knots. It's just flapping helplessly in the wind. Now I'm starting to do 60 kilometers an hour and look at it flapping in the breeze. So we have 60 kilometers an hour of wind. That, my friends, is apparent wind. I hope that makes a bit of sense and that is clear. So when we've got wind and we start to get some wind, we start to build that apparent wind, we've got actually more wind than is actually on the water. And so we tend to go faster than even the wind pressure. And that enables us now all of a sudden to be able to, even though it tends to move forward, we can, because we're going at a speed, we can adjust that apparent wind and where it's coming from, not by lots, but by enough just to start to head up to windward, and we can start to use that space up close to the no-go zone to be able to get to windward and stop that again. Everything's about the walk of shame. We get to go up towards windward. When I've spoken about sails, I talk about a sail that is useful for beginners and then sails that are more advanced and useful for more advanced riders and foilers. And the reason being is this, that at the point where we're learning and we're just moving and we're getting to go, a regular boat if you like, we just go at that wind pressure, and so we need depth in the sail. We need a sail that's slightly baggy to be able to give us the drive to get going. Go for an older sail, go one that's a little bit more powerful, and that will help your cause dramatically. But once you've passed that stage, then what you're really looking for is a sail like this, that's a bit more efficient, that's tighter. It's tighter in the leading edge, and it's not full. And so as you go and you're starting to want to use the power of the wind, it's more efficient because it's just, you're not dragging things. So there are 3 points of sail: the close hauled with the no-go zone, the reach, broad reach, and the run. A tack and a jibe, and what tack you're on. And I mentioned here as well that people always wanted to know who has the right of way. And from a typical sailing perspective, starboard tack, right hand forward, has right of way over port tack, which is your left hand forward. So when you're out, when you go to make a manoeuvre with someone coming the other way, see which way you're going and either hold your course as best you can, or you make sure you avoid the person that's on starboard tack. You do your best to avoid the person that's on starboard tack, and everybody's life will be that little better. That's it for this edition of Wild Goose Adventures. I hope you found this little segment helpful. Leave a comment down below and I'll answer it, and if you've got any more thoughts then please let me know. If you've liked it, hit the thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe. That'd be totally awesome. And until next time with Wild Goose Adventures, smooth sailing.